Before the story begins, make sure to like, subscribe, and let me know. What time do you usually watch videos? And don't forget to suggest the next story or content you'd like to see. Story 1. The Bedroom Curtain That Whispered at Night. When I was a teenager, my family lived in an old farmhouse on the outskirts of town. The kind of place with creaking floors, drafty hallways, and a history you could almost feel pressing against the walls. My bedroom was at the far end of the second floor, overlooking the woods behind the house. From my window, I could see the thick trees stretching out like a dark ocean, and at night, when the wind pushed through them, they swayed like restless figures in the dark. The room itself was simple: wooden floors, pale wallpaper that had faded in spots, and a single heavy curtain over my window. The curtain was old, patterned with faint floral designs that had lost their color over the years. It didn't close all the way. When I drew it across at night, there was always a small gap at the edges where the moonlight slipped through. That curtain had been there since before we moved in, nailed into a wooden rod that seemed too stubborn to come off. My mom had promised she would replace it one day, but like most things in that house, it stayed as it was. It was the curtain that became the center of everything. The first time I noticed it, I was lying in bed late at night. My parents were asleep, the house still except for the occasional groan of the old wood. I was half awake, staring at the faint outline of the curtain moving slightly with the draft. That was when I heard it, a faint sound like someone whispering. It was so soft I thought it might have been the wind. But it wasn't the kind of rustling that came from trees or floorboards. It was the cadence of words, a whisper, coming from the curtain itself. I sat up, straining to hear, but the moment I moved, it stopped. The room went still again, except for my own shallow breathing. Over the next week, the whispers returned, always faint, always at night when I was lying in bed. Sometimes they were just murmurs, impossible to make out. Other times, I thought I heard fragments of words, syllables carried to me like threads unraveling in the dark. It became so frequent that I stopped sleeping well. I would stare at the curtain, watching its faint swaying, listening for that low, rhythmic breath of a voice. And then came the night I realized it wasn't just whispering. It was breathing. I woke up around 2 a.m. to the distinct sound of slow, steady breaths. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. The sound wasn't coming from me, and it wasn't from the hallway or the walls. It was coming from behind the curtain, right next to the window. Every muscle in my body froze. My eyes were locked on the curtain as it shifted slightly, as though someone were standing behind it, just inches from the glass. I wanted to scream, but nothing came out. My throat closed, and I just lay there, gripping the edge of the blanket, listening to the breaths. Long, deep, deliberate. Finally, I forced myself to move. My hand reached out for the lamp on my nightstand, and I flicked it on. The light flooded the room, and the breathing stopped instantly. The curtain hung motionless, innocent, as though nothing had happened. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. When I told my parents the next morning, they brushed it off. My mom said it was probably the wind whistling through cracks in the frame, and my dad told me I was letting my imagination run wild. But I knew what I'd heard. I knew the difference between a draft and something alive. The nights that followed became unbearable. The breathing came back, louder, more insistent. Sometimes I swore I heard the whispering shape into words, though they were muffled, like someone speaking through cupped hands. I thought I caught fragments like hear or listen, but I could never be sure. I tried pulling the curtain aside once, convinced I would catch someone standing there, but the moment I touched it, the sound stopped, leaving only the silence and the empty window. I started sleeping with the lamp on, but even that didn't help. The curtain seemed to mock me, its folds heavy, its shadows deep. One night, I woke up to the sound again, only this time the breathing was not behind the curtain. It was closer, at the side of my bed. I snapped my head toward the sound, but there was nothing there. Just the heavy curtain, swaying slightly, as though it had only just been disturbed. That was the first night I cried myself back to sleep. One evening, desperate for answers, I asked my mom again about the curtain. That was when she admitted something she hadn't told me before. The family who had lived in the farmhouse before us had a teenage son, my age, in fact. He had taken his own life in that very room by the window years ago. She hadn't wanted to say anything before, afraid it might unsettle me. But the way she looked at me when I told her about the breathing, it was the first time I saw her face pale with something like fear. After that, I couldn't stand it anymore. I begged her to replace the curtain. She agreed, finally, and one afternoon, she pulled it down while I was at school. But when I came home, she was quiet, distant. I asked her what was wrong, and she only shook her head. Later that night, I overheard her talking to my father in hushed tones. She told him that when she had unpinned the curtain, there had been faint words scratched into the wall beneath the window. They looked like they'd been carved with something sharp. 3 words, "Let me breathe." My parents painted over it the next day, and a new curtain was put up. For a while, things felt normal again. The whispers stopped, the breathing faded, the room was quiet. But sometimes in the dead of night, I still wake up with the sensation of someone standing at the window. I'll stare at the new curtain, waiting, listening. And in the silence, I swear I can almost hear it, the faint, slow rhythm of a breath, patiently waiting to be acknowledged again. Story 2, the hotel room. Drapes with a hidden presence. When Marcus checked into the hotel, he wasn't expecting anything more than a quiet place to rest before his early morning flight. He was tired from a long business trip, worn down by endless meetings and delayed connections. The hotel was one of those mid-tier chains that dotted highways, neither luxurious nor cheap, just functional. The kind of place where the decor was forgettable, the rooms clean enough, and the staff polite but distant. The room he was given was on the 6th floor. It smelled faintly of carpet cleaner and stale air conditioning, but Marcus barely noticed. He tossed his suitcase onto the bed, kicked off his shoes, and collapsed into the mattress with a sigh. The bedside clock read 11:42 p.m. He had less than 6 hours before he had to wake up and head to the airport. That was when he noticed the curtains. They were heavy drapes, an outdated dark maroon with golden swirls. They reached from ceiling to floor, covering the large window that overlooked the parking lot. What struck him wasn't their color, but how they seemed to puff slightly outward, as though there was air moving behind them. But the window wasn't open. In fact, the hotel specifically had stickers warning guests not to open the windows for safety reasons. Marcus dismissed it at first. Old buildings had strange drafts. He tried to sleep, but the quiet of the room wasn't the kind of quiet that made sleep easy. It was the kind that pressed down on you, thick and heavy. The hum of the air conditioning felt too distant, and the silence in between its cycles stretched too long. Then he heard it, a sound from behind the curtains, soft, steady, and disturbingly human. Breathing. Marcus froze, every muscle in his body tightening. The sound was faint, like someone trying not to be noticed, but unmistakable. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. He sat up, straining to listen. The breathing continued. 100 thoughts shot through his mind. Someone had broken into his room. Someone was hiding behind the curtains, waiting for him to sleep. He grabbed his phone, switched on the flashlight, and pointed it toward the drapes. The light hit the fabric, but nothing showed through. The curtains remained still, the maroon swirls glowing faintly under the LED beam, but the sound didn't stop. Whoever, or whatever, was there wasn't moving, just breathing. His heart pounded so hard it hurt. Marcus considered calling the front desk, but his pride held him back. What if it really was nothing? What if the staff came up, pulled back the curtain, and revealed nothing but glass? He'd look insane. Summoning what courage he had, Marcus stood. His legs felt weak, his bare feet cold against the carpet. He inched toward the curtains, phone light trembling in his hand. The closer he got, the louder it seemed. The breathing wasn't ragged or sickly, it was calm, patient. Whoever was behind the curtain wasn't afraid. They were waiting. Marcus stopped a foot away. His hand reached for the curtain edge. He hesitated. His instincts screamed at him not to. And then the breathing stopped. The sudden silence was worse than the sound itself. It was like whatever was there knew he was about to reveal it. Marcus's throat was dry. He yanked the curtain aside in one quick motion, heart hammering. The window was there, closed, locked, nothing else. He let out a shaky laugh, though it didn't feel like relief. His body was still tight, his skin prickled with sweat. Maybe it had been his imagination. Stress, exhaustion, the brain playing tricks when sleep deprived. He let the curtain fall back into place, shaking his head. But when he turned, he froze again. The bed was rumpled differently than he had left it. The blanket had shifted, as though someone had lain down on the side opposite him. He stood motionless, staring at it, trying to convince himself it had been like that from the beginning. His thoughts spiraled. Had someone been in here before him? Did housekeeping miss something? Was there a chance someone else had the key card? He backed toward the door, suddenly desperate to leave. His hand shook as he fumbled with the latch. Then, in the reflection of the dark TV screen across the room, he saw it. The curtain behind him swayed outward, not from air, from weight, as though someone had stepped out from behind it. But Marcus hadn't heard footsteps. He bolted, flinging the door open and racing down the hallway, barefoot, heart thundering. He didn't stop until he reached the brightly lit lobby, breathless and pale. The night clerk looked up, startled. Marcus stammered something about someone being in his room, about the curtains, about breathing. The clerk's expression shifted in a way Marcus couldn't read. Was it concern or recognition? "We'll send security up," the clerk said quietly. "Please, sit here." Marcus sat in the lobby for nearly 20 minutes, staring at the vending machines, too afraid to go back upstairs. Eventually, the clerk returned, his face carefully blank. "No one was in the room, sir. We checked thoroughly. Window was locked, curtains undisturbed." Marcus insisted, desperate, shaking. But the clerk didn't argue. He simply handed Marcus a new keycard for a different room on the opposite side of the hotel. Marcus didn't ask questions. He didn't want answers. But as he turned to leave the counter, the clerk said something that made his blood run cold. "You're not the first guest who's mentioned the drapes on that floor." Marcus barely slept that night, even in the new room. Every sound made him jump. Every shadow looked like fabric shifting. When dawn finally came, he left the hotel without breakfast, without checking out. He couldn't stand to stay another minute. He never spoke of it again. But sometimes, late at night, when he's alone in his apartment, Marcus swears he can still hear it. Soft, steady, patient, breathing just behind the curtain. Story 3, The Child's Window. Where breathing never stopped. When Karen and Michael bought their first home, it felt like the culmination of every dream they had ever shared. The house wasn't large or particularly new. It was a modest 2-story in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind of place where children rode bicycles until the streetlights came on. For them, it was perfect. It was where they imagined raising their 3-year-old daughter, Emily, and watching her grow into the kind of childhood neither of them had ever truly known. Emily's bedroom was on the 2nd floor, a sunlit space with pale yellow walls and a wide window that looked out into the backyard. The window was framed by a pair of floral curtains, slightly faded but charming, swaying gently when the breeze flowed through. Karen loved how the morning light filled the room, soft and warm. But Emily seemed strangely uneasy about it. The first sign was small, almost insignificant. One night, as Karen tucked her daughter into bed, Emily whispered, "Can you tell him to stop breathing so loud?" Karen froze, confused. "Who, sweetheart?" Emily pointed toward the curtains, half drawn across the window. "The man who hides there." Karen laughed nervously, dismissing it as the kind of imaginary friend children invent. "There's no man, sweetie, just the wind." She kissed Emily goodnight, pulled the curtains tight, and told herself not to worry. But the breathing started soon after. At first, it was faint, barely audible, something you could mistake for the house settling or the rustle of fabric. Yet night after night, when Karen lingered in Emily's room after bedtime, she began to hear it too. Slow, heavy inhales followed by rough, rattling exhales. It came from the window, low and deliberate, as though someone stood hidden behind the curtains and drew breath with a sickening patience. Karen and Michael checked the locks. They inspected the glass, the frame, even the siding outside. There was no opening, no cracks, no possible entry point. Still, the breathing continued. Emily grew restless. She would wake in the middle of the night, trembling, insisting that the curtain man watched her as she slept. "He doesn't blink," she would whisper, eyes wide. "He just breathes and waits." Michael, ever the skeptic, tried to prove it was nothing. One night, determined to ease their daughter's fears, he set up a chair beside the window and promised to sit there until Emily fell asleep. Hours later, Karen woke to the sound of Michael stumbling into their bedroom, pale and shaken. He wouldn't meet her eyes. "I heard it," he admitted hoarsely. "I sat right there, and I swear, someone was breathing inches from me. But when I yanked the curtains back, there was nothing. No one." The house began to change. The air in Emily's room grew stifling, heavy with an invisible presence. Toys were knocked over in the night, books slid off shelves without explanation. And always, the breathing, sometimes soft, sometimes loud enough to drown out Emily's frightened cries. Karen tried everything. She brought in a priest who blessed the room. She left bowls of salt the window, recited prayers, even burned sage until the smoke choked the air. Nothing silenced it. The breathing was relentless, steady, and impossibly close. It was Emily who revealed the final piece. One morning, clutching her stuffed rabbit, she looked up at her mother and asked, "Why does the curtain man say my name?" Karen's blood ran cold. She pressed Emily for details, but the child only shook her head and whispered, "He says it when I'm almost asleep. He says, Ili, like he's right next to me." Terrified, Karen called a contractor to remove the entire window. She didn't care about the cost, but when the crew pried away the frame, they uncovered something that shouldn't have been there at all. Stuffed deep into the wall cavity, where the window had been installed decades earlier, was a rotting, water-stained curtain, identical to the one hanging in Emily's room. Behind it lay a small wooden recess, almost like a hidden compartment. Inside, wrapped in decayed fabric, was something worse. The remains of a small mask, crudely carved with hollow eyes and a slit for a mouth. No one could explain why it was there, or who had placed it. The house's history revealed only that a previous owner's child had died in that very room, years before, under mysterious circumstances. The coroner's report listed suffocation. Karen burned the old curtain and mask in the backyard that same night, watching until nothing remained but ash. For a brief while, the house was quiet. Emily slept soundly, her laughter returning, her room finally free of dread. But the peace didn't last. A week later, as Karen tiptoed into Emily's room to check on her, she froze. The new curtains stirred in a windless room. From the shadows, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of breathing, slow, ragged, and patient. Emily, half asleep, whispered into the darkness, "Good night, curtain man." 3 stories, 3 curtains, and 3 shadows that should never have been there. Sometimes the smallest detail, a ripple in the fabric, a sound in the silence, a breath that doesn't belong, becomes the thing that keeps you awake long after the lights go out. If you ever find yourself staring at the folds of your own curtains at night, wondering if they might be hiding more than just the dark outside, remember these accounts. And ask yourself one question. What would you do if you heard breathing, but knew you were supposed to be alone?